Good evening. I'm PJ O'Neill, serving as branch chief for STEM training. Welcome to this month's Tech Talk, presented by Mr. Daniel Opstal from the U.S. Geological Survey. Tech Talks are sponsored by the U.S. Coast Guard, the Coast Guard Auxiliary, and the Boy Scouts of America Sea Scout program. The Tech Talks are held on the fourth Tuesday of the month at 2100 Eastern. That's 9 p.m. Next month's Tech Talk is on July 25th, presented by Eastern Shipbuilding. Just a reminder, the Tech Talk is recorded and posted on the Sea Scout and AuxScout YouTube channels. If you're watching the Tech Talk on the YouTube channels, please be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you get all of the notifications for the latest Tech Talks. It makes for excellent training with your ship or your shipmates in your flotilla. Now, tonight is a little bit different. Mr. Opstal had to travel for work, so this Tech Talk is pre-recorded. We'll be back live again next month with Eastern Shipbuilding. Just a little bit about Mr. Opstal. He's our subject matter expert. He's a geographer for the U.S. Geological Survey. He's an Eagle Scout in the Transatlantic Council and Assistant Scoutmaster for Troop 141 in Herndon, Virginia. I'll turn it over to our pre-recorded presentation by Mr. Daniel Opstal.
Well, good. Well, I'll just get started then. So my name is Dan Opstal. Thanks so much for being here. I'm sorry I'm not actually in person with you or on the Zoom session, but this recording is meant to give you a nice overview of the United States Geological Survey. As far as my own background, I am a scout, so I was drawn to this when this came across our educational programs desk. So I earned my Eagle Scout over at the Transatlantic Council overseas. A different way of seeing the world and experiencing international scouting, but also appreciating and gaining a love for the outdoors. I think that's universal. And so I'm continuing that on with my own son. I'm now an assistant scoutmaster over at Troop 124 in nearby Herndon, Virginia. That's where I'm talking to you from, actually from our headquarters here in Reston, Virginia. I'm a geographer for the survey. In case you're not familiar with the survey, it's actually an organization that doesn't have any regulatory or management responsibility. It's the nation's Earth, Water, Biology, and Civilian Mapping Organization in the Department of the Interior. So the job is to bring foundational data and expertise to inform the decisions of those regulators, managers, policymakers, and the public about lots and lots of different environmental, resource, and public safety issues. Science for a changing world. That's our motto. So hope you enjoy this talk and would be happy to follow up with those as possible. So my thanks to Peter and other folks within NOAA that made this possible. And without further ado, I will just get rolling here. So this talk is called Beyond Maps, the Evolving Earth Sciences. So a little bit about the USGS. So as you can see here in this slide, the mission, it's about Earth system dynamics, and that's of course a very broad topic. This particular organizational structure came about in 2010 and kind of follows what people do for a living within, got their degrees in terms of what they do for the USGS. So we have a lot of geologists, as you might imagine, but also hydrologists, geographers, and biologists. And so this gives a sort of a nod to all of these different disciplines within the different mission areas. So it's a huge area. It's about targeting science to decision makers in the most effective manner possible. And what we call actionable information. Actionable information has lots of different definitions within the Defense Department, for example. But for us, it means delivering science that matters, right? And that's really, really powerful here. So a big priority is to provide this science to different communities, especially underserved communities. And I think that's one of the really great things about USGS is that it can cross a lot of boundaries between state, local, tribal, and federal partners in these major mission areas. So So let me get into a few examples about USGS and its people. So this slide gives you a sense of who USGS is by the numbers. So it's a fairly large organization, very widely dispersed all across these United States, 68 science centers in over 400 locations, an incredible array of lab and field-based studies going on. So about 10,000 total personnel, including all told contractors, volunteers, and even emeritus scientists who continue their efforts, and we're all very glad to have that. So there is a power in partnerships all its own, and this organization couldn't survive without them. So there's lots and lots of cooperative engagement efforts. Working initiatives like climate adaptation. So there's a climate adaptation science centers. There's a number of cooperative research units. There's a number of areas where the water resources research institutes work together. And you can't do it without field work, right? So if you're familiar with the USGS, you probably know that we operate stream gauges. And there's lots and lots of stream gauge cooperators. You want to go kayaking somewhere in the United States, you're likely using data from the USGS. And what's more, if you're experiencing hazard, you're likely going to hear about it from information via the USGS, specifically the National Earthquake Information Center, and you can actually contribute back to that through citizen science initiatives like Did You Feel It and other efforts. So suffice it to say, I could go on and on and on, but there's lots of areas where we're playing an instrumental role. Volcano monitoring is huge, and this continues globally too through partnerships with the United States Agency for International Development. So it's not just domestic. There's actually an overseas role for some of the programs. And then speaking of overseas, actually way above the land, there's also a satellite program partnership with NASA, the 50-year plus archive and Landsat satellite partnership. So we'll talk a little bit about that where we're going on. So lots and lots of areas where we're able to contribute and partner, and perhaps one day you can find yourself working with the USGS or partnering with the USGS. So I work a specific area called the Civil Applications Committee. It's actually the reason I'm not on camera today. I'm unfortunately not able to turn my camera on in my building, but that's because we have some unique partners with defense and intelligence for remote sensing. And it makes sense because these folks procure a lot of this data. And so we are able to do some of our federal civil mission by working with defense and intelligence counterparts. So very exciting developments. This group that does this and meets to facilitate and oversee this mission is called the CAC, the Civil Applications Committee. I'm the executive secretary for that group. And it's been going on for over 40 years. What we call the triple junction, this sort of relationship between the IC, the DoD, and the federal civil community. Of course, it's also the place where three fault lines meet, so it's a bit of a geology reference as well. So we are all working together to ensure the best use of remote sensing data, which is super important. And we also want to buy it in the most efficient manner possible from the many providers that now give us, not give us, but provide the globe with satellite imagery data. And more than just satellite imagery data, it's also radio frequency and spectral characteristics analysis data. All of these things are very, very important. So let's talk a little bit about the future. So this is sort of one of those graphics that tell a very broad story about where USGS was and where it's headed. And it's very much from an Earth to the moon type story. So the upper left map that you see there is actually an 1890s era historical topographic map of the Newburyport, New Hampshire quadrangle. If you love maps and you want to build maps and use them, on the right you actually see a new Topo Builder application, which is very popular for custom-built on-the-fly mapping data for those that use geographic information systems. That's very, very powerful. And then, as you start to look at the satellite data, that's the Landsat satellite. So the Landsat satellite constellation has been around since 1972. The first Earth imaging remote sensing satellite, which was built during the Eisenhower administration, it was called Corona in the 1960s. So this has been going on for a long time. First within the defense community and intelligence community, and then later on the Earth observations community that goes on. And then if you look at the far bottom left graphic, you start to see a very interesting image, and it's actually an image from the front has cam on the NASA Mars rover Curiosity, and it's provided by the USGS Astral Geology Science Center, which works with NASA very closely. It's really a story of the Earth and beyond, right? We have to study geology out in space on asteroids and on different planets. So it's very, very exciting to be able to work in that arena. And we do have a specialized center that deals with that, and of course, lots of partners in NASA and others that deal in the Earth and space sciences. So speaking of space, Landsat Next is the next program in the series. We've got Landsat 7, 8, and 9 in orbit right now, and this is going to be the future. High resolution science quality data that is available to the public and to the globe. So this next constellation is going to be one that involves smaller satellites with greater revisit time. It's going to have super spectral capabilities. That means more spectral bands. And you may not understand the value of that, but more spectral bands actually enable us to get better quality data, whether that's understanding the minerals that we have beneath our feet that provide us many things. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But it also is about understanding how the soil is doing, how the vegetation is growing, right? How's agriculture doing? And it provides really, really great information on that. And then some improved resolution that enables us to get down to 10 meters, which, in today's high resolution world, if you look at remote sensing data, you go, well, you can see data that's 1 meter, from sources. I've seen it on the news. Well, perhaps you can, but for agricultural monitoring, that's not necessary for really effective efforts. And so for a lot of missions, 10 to 30 meters is really powerful. And you couple that with artificial intelligence and other types of work, which I'm going to talk about as well, you're going to see some really great capabilities. So Landsat's one of the most widely used remote sensing data sources, not just in the U.S. government, but globally, right? So there's a huge benefit. The U.S. economy benefit alone is something on the order of $2 billion a year. So an extremely powerful capability, and the future is looking bright indeed with more spectral bands, greater resolution, more capability. So this is a really great area, and it's just a great time for remote sensing in general. So that's not the only thing we're involved in. We're also involved in remote sensing from the ground perspective and using the data called LiDAR, light detection and ranging. You've probably heard radio detection and ranging, but this is actually light detection and ranging. And this is foundational for creating three-dimensional maps of the Earth's surface, the vegetation, the built environment to a high degree of accuracy, so that you can do things like building information modeling, right, for engineering and construction. So the animation down below from Meta, on the bottom right, it shows you how many buildings have a default single-story height in the absence of LiDAR height information. The after image shows building footprints with an estimated height from LiDAR. So the graphic from the GIS firm ESRI in the upper right shows a detailed georeferenced 3D model of the urban environment, which can be combined with other geospatial data sets like utilities data, transportation networks, population density, and others to produce what's called digital twins of the planet. So it's really a cool capability. It's like seeing your the metaverse, if you will, in a whole different light. And then the LiDAR-based image of Chicago, which is in there as well, shows how LiDAR data can be used for 3D visualization and urban planning. So you can look at things like tree canopies, right? You can look at where your urban heat islands might be. So if you're an urban planner, this is another area to consider. And of course, I understand I'm talking to Sea Scouts, so planning where your built out man-made lakes and that kind of thing maybe is another part of it. So in the upper left, you see the quantifying vegetation information for different applications such as biomass, carbon estimations, fire fuels, land cover mapping, timber stocks for precision forestry initiatives. Everyone loves that one. The forest profile that you see there is an area from Yosemite National Park over near Half Dome. So lots and lots of areas, and I'm sure you all would appreciate that you can also do disaster response and risk assessments, such as flood vulnerability initiatives. So lots of areas that we can do within this 3D elevation program effort. So not only that, we obviously do land monitoring. So we've talked a little bit about that. So this is how we can analyze land change. I mentioned that Landsat's been around since 1972. The beauty of that is that now coupling that with cloud-based storage, you can actually see the projected data and the Earth evolving over time, right? You can look at land cover changes and analyze what landscapes look like and what, in fact, they might look like in the future. So there's a huge change here, and you can see in the animation the land cover in Richland, Washington from 1985 to 2014, just to kind of understand sort of that changing landscape and sort of understand and appreciate how that might inform a decision maker, right? The land manager, a farmer, um, anybody who leverages and uses the waterways, for example, um, will benefit from this information. So, as I mentioned when I started my talk, we actually work globally with partners such as the U.S. Agency for International Development in various initiatives. This is one of them, actually. And I mentioned the power of agriculture. We're so fortunate to have a bountiful agriculture here in the United States, but that's not the case in many different parts of the world. And to help analyze those types of problems, of a complex system of IT warning systems has been developed called the Famine Early Warning System with various academic and federal partners. So the idea here is to provide unbiased evidence-based analysis for governments and relief agencies who plan and respond to humanitarian crises. So this network focuses on agroclimate, markets and trade, nutrition, and conflict. And the idea here is to converge evidence, provides information for decision makers to address food insecurity globally. And this is a very powerful initiative to help out our efforts overseas. And you can kind of see that in the graphic to the right there, where there's different conditions in that map, right? So minimal and then stressed vegetation all the way over to famine regions. Earth MRI. So there's a huge effort afoot with state geologists and other partners to look at funding foundational geoscience data collection, data preservation, and information related to critical minerals and energy resources. One of the big initiatives that's been funded recently is the Earth MRI project. It brings high resolution digital elevation data together with geophysical and geologic mapping information to characterize areas with critical mineral potential. This is a great investment and it continues to be an investment for geologic mappers and mineral resource specialists who are tracking the nation's irreplaceable geologic knowledge. So we're looking at mine waste, surface and subsurface resources for reclamation initiatives. And so there's a lot of power here in terms of analyzing the minerals that are so crucial for our use. And I'll show you a couple examples of that in a minute. So this is why you really care, right? Because what do we use minerals for? You may hear this term, oh, minerals, critical minerals. Wow, well, what makes them so critical? Well, some of them are used in our jet fighters, right? If you look at the bottom left, that's a U.S. Air Force F-35 Alpha Lightning II Joint Strike Fighter there. It's used in the goggles and some of the specialized equipment our military personnel need. It's used in offshore direct wind turbines. It's used in your electric and hybrid vehicles. It's even used in your healthcare and medical equipment, right? So it's got a huge impact across society. And so to have these kinds of initiatives, it's never been more important to understand the role of mineral resources and to understand and have the different communities in the space and earth sciences work together and appreciate that. So it's there's such a important and sort of dizzying array of necessity here to understand this. So looking internationally, certainly you've seen some examples with drought, famine, early warning, and the minerals. Now you see the volcano program I was referencing earlier. This is a wonderful, wonderful initiative. It really focuses on getting data out to these foreign partners that maybe don't have the infrastructure or the depth of infrastructure or the satellite capability and resources that the United States can bring to bear in tracking the activities of volcanoes, which can be, of course, if you've got, I think a lot of people understand kind of what happened in the Pompeii scenario, right? If superheated gases are flowing down the hillside at you, it's too late, right? So tracking and understanding volcanoes and ensuring that that the work is safe and that people can be kept safe in terms of both the people that are analyzing volcanoes and the people that live around them is the work of the Volcano Disaster Assistance Program. So there's been some really great initiatives, and it is a life-saving initiative to understand the behavior of these volcanoes from, with obviously the focus on Latin America, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Basin. There have been so many ways that this program has reduced disaster risk. So lots of other areas exist too within the risk community and the disaster community, and the USGS is writing about them. It's a science organization after all. So there's lots of disparate applications that you can focus on and be able to understand kind of how we do damage and risk assessments. You can actually go and look at the haywired earthquake scenario, for example, and understand what those cascading consequences could be of a major earthquake and a different storm. So there are so many different areas that we can appreciate of the sort of within the disaster realm. And in addition to that, we can do real-time situational assessments, right? And provide this data back to our different partners. So there's a huge set of expertise, data, and resources to look at risk from sort of multiple hazards. Those are including the ones here, right? Geohazards, meteorological hazards, contaminants, invasive species, impacts of climate change. The natural hazards is one of the major mission areas, and it coordinates USGS emergency management response activities. Lots of long-term planning is part of this, right? To make sure that hazards mission areas are covered down and integrated together so that we understand kind of the cascading impacts. So for example, if you have a volcano that may trigger a lahar or a landslide right afterwards. So some of the areas here include sort of post-disaster supplemental funding to rebuild capabilities for state, local, and federal partners related to hurricanes, landslides, earthquakes, disasters. Puerto Rico Planning Board is actually using an island-wide landslide susceptibility map generated after Hurricane Maria to inform rebuilding and relocation decisions. The National Weather Service is using newly expanded USGS NOAA total water level and coastal change forecast, which is very exciting. That actually will allow for a 6-day forecast of total water level and coastal change for the U.S. coastline from Texas to Maine. The Puerto Rico Seismic Network used continuous data from new and hardened seismic monitoring equipment to effectively respond to the 2020 earthquake sequence. And the Hawaii Volcano Observatory used data to respond to the Kilauea eruption. Of course, Mauna Loa also had an eruption. So always lots of different activities going on that can help us understand different scenarios and learn from these different disasters to do better the next time. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other areas where we're bringing in a range of capabilities and contributions to the mission. Coastal storm support cells, which supported Hurricane Fiona. There have been Alaskan severe storms and, of course, Hurricane Ian. This stuff is so critical. coastal counties, as I'm sure Sea Scouts are aware, home to 127 million people and accounting for 8.6 trillion of goods and services each year. Coastal communities are facing coastal change hazards for hurricanes and storms and changing climate, lots of property hazards and infrastructure damage. In fact, in the past 5 years, tropical cyclones resulted in $343.1 billion of damage in direct economic, catastrophe and in those coastal areas. So really, really a challenge. Decadal climate events like El Nino on the West Coast bring storms depleting beaches of sand, so there's none of those buffers anymore, those dunes. Huge sea level rise impacts, and so we're seeing changes to our country already related to that. Different types of floods in low-lying and high-lying areas. So again, continuing intensification of storms that are faster moving. People need decisions, and they need to be able to make all of these planning decisions together. And so these types of predictions are complex in nature in particular, and so USGS tries to model for dynamic processes that increase water levels, breaking waves, river discharge, storm surge, seasonal variability, tides, and the changes in sea level. So lots and lots of complex science going on here. Really, really important that we understand these. And of course, wildfires, right? You can't have this conversation without appreciating the importance of wildland fire management pre and post, right? It's not just about the fire going on, it's also understanding the combination of fuels that are there with the weather, and of course, understanding fire behavior, because fires have been moving faster over time. So if you've not heard or been to the website, there's actually a National Interagency Fire Center that focuses on a lot of these issues. It's jointly run by Department of Interior and Department of Agriculture. So lots and lots of really interesting areas to look at here. So obviously we've talked a little bit about the fact that it's not just about the Earth, right? It's about our planet and beyond. It's about how we understand the atmosphere above us and space beyond. So this is a little bit of information about the USGS that perhaps you didn't know already, that we actually do hazards for space weather and solar activity like flares and coronal mass ejections that disrupt the magnetosphere and create magnetic storms. Magnetic storms can disrupt our modern technology that we all rely on, right? Like the electric power grid. So it's an important area for us all to stay aware of. And again, you can see that this network spans the globe in terms of understanding those hazards. So if we don't map out that information, then and we won't understand the connectivity of the planet. And so this is a graphic of understanding this. Again, it all goes back to building the most resilient power grid possible. All right, so let's talk a little bit about climate mapping. Executive Order 14008, tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. It recognized the need for public access to climate-related information for tribal, state, local governments, communities, and the private sector. So there's lots of partners. I mentioned the CAC before, but there's also the USGS Federal Geographic Data Committee, NOAA, and the U.S. Global Change Research Program. And these all focused efforts on a federal climate data portal that integrates data together for tools, data information for interoperable information sets that can be used. This is super important to understand climate and risk, and looking at things like building standards, right? To help ensure that new infrastructure that's built is climate resilient to the many additional challenges we have now in this particular arena. So I'm starting to come to the end of my slide pack here. This is kind of a unique slide. Sherlock Holmes once said, "It was the dog that didn't bark that made all the difference." Now, in the context of this Alaskan pipeline that you're seeing here, you might be wondering, why are you using that phrase? The most important contributions of a lot of this work comes what you do in terms of engaging before a particular disaster. It's about the disaster that didn't happen as a result of all the preparatory and engagement work, right? So this is actually showcasing the story of the greatest environmental disaster of 2002 that you never heard of. So when the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System was being built in the 1970s, USGS geologists identified where active faults, right, crossed the pipeline and worked with engineers to design a system of kinks and slider bars to accommodate the potential slip. So when the magnitude 7.9 on the Richter scale Denali earthquake struck in 2002, the pipeline slid to within a half a foot of the end of the slider, but it did not rupture. No oil was spilled. Nobody heard about it. It was the dog that didn't bark, and hence the Sherlock Holmes quote up front. This is increasingly important as we adapt to a changing world and a changing climate. I've really enjoyed giving you all a bit of an overview of what we do and how we work within this space. It's a tremendously important arena that the USGS and its many partners work in, and I hope that you all may consider that in the future, or working for not just for the USGS, but maybe for the government or affiliated with the government. Um, and and with that, I will leave you all and wish you all the best in not just your scouting careers, but also going forward into the future. Thank you so much.